The arrival that changed everything. The Galactic Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds, assimilated countless civilizations, and subjugated entire species under its iron rule. Planets were merely resources, people nothing more than numbers in an ever-growing empire that spanned the stars. It was an unchallenged force, a regime that had perfected the art of domination, marching through the galaxy like an unstoppable storm. And now it had set its sights on Earth. Grand strategist Korek, a veteran of 100 successful campaigns, studied the latest intelligence report with narrowed reptilian eyes. Earth was classified as a Category IOE death world, a planet teeming with natural disasters, volatile ecosystems, and bizarre, unpredictable life forms. The High Council, in its infinite arrogance, had dismissed these details as mere environmental nuisances, unworthy of concern. The only fact that mattered was that Earth's inhabitants were barely spacefaring. They had only just begun to take their first timid steps beyond their own moon. To Korek and his fleet of warships, it was nothing more than another easy conquest. "Prepare the fleet," Korek growled, mandibles clicking with anticipation. By this time tomorrow, Earth will be under Dominion control. But if there was one thing the High Council had never understood, one thing they had never accounted for, it was humanity. When the Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, it expected silence. The kind of eerie calm that came before a species realized its inevitable fate. What it found instead was chaos. A swarm of orbital satellites, space stations, and debris clouded the system in a labyrinth of unpredictable movement. Some of these satellites were ancient, abandoned husks from Earth's early space programs. Others, however, were very much active, scanning, observing, and broadcasting. The moment the Dominion fleet appeared, thousands of signals pulsed across the void, pinging through deep space networks and civilian channels alike. Unidentified fleet detected. Possible hostile incursion. All defense stations, stand by for contact. Grand strategist Korek frowned. He had anticipated some level of response, but nothing this immediate. Earth should have been scrambling. Instead, it was reacting. A Dominion scout ship moved forward, scanning the orbiting structures. Most seemed rudimentary compared to Dominion technology, but there was something off about them. Before the scouts could report back, something unexpected happened. One of Earth's satellites, an old defunct communication relay, moved. It was subtle at first, a small drift that barely seemed intentional. Then another moved, and another. Within moments, dozens of seemingly dead satellites had come to life, shifting their positions with eerie coordination. Korek's mandibles twitched. Earth's orbital network wasn't a defensive grid. It was a trap. Before he could issue new orders, an encrypted signal cut through all Dominion channels. It was direct. It was human. A hologram materialized on Korek's bridge. A human figure clad in what appeared to be a military uniform. Female. Steely-eyed. Unshaken. "This is Admiral Victoria Reynolds of the United Earth Defense Initiative. You have entered restricted space without authorization. Identify yourselves immediately." There was no fear in her voice. No uncertainty. Korek had spoken to countless leaders in his time. Kings, emperors, warlords. This was something else entirely. "Admiral Reynolds," Korek replied, keeping his voice measured. "I am Grand Strategist Korek of the Galactic Dominion. We are here to oversee the integration of your species into our empire. Surrender now, and your compliance will be rewarded." There was silence for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. The human laughed. It wasn't the nervous, fearful laughter of someone trying to mask their terror. It was the kind of laugh one gives when they've just heard a truly excellent joke. "Oh, that's adorable," Reynolds said, shaking her head. "Let me guess. You based this invasion on some old intelligence report, saw that we were still playing around with chemical rockets and assumed we'd roll over the moment you showed up." Korek's eyes narrowed. "Your civilization has barely breached interstellar travel. You cannot hope to resist us." Reynolds leaned forward, Let me update you on a few things. First, that outdated intelligence you're relying on. We've known about your surveillance drones for over a century. The moment we detected alien probes in our system, we made sure that anything they saw was exactly what we wanted them to see. Korak's clawed fingers tightened. Second, Reynolds continued, our technology has advanced a little since your last report. The satellites you just scanned, they aren't relics. They're part of our defense network. The moment your ships crossed into the outer system, we had every single one of you mapped, tracked, and locked. The Grand Strategist's tail flicked in irritation. His officers exchanged glances. It was impossible. A primitive species couldn't have known they were being watched. They couldn't have planned for this. Unless they weren't primitive. Unless Earth had been hiding. Third, Reynolds said, the humor fading from her voice, I'd advise you to reconsider your invasion plans, because right now my superiors are deciding whether we should give you a chance to leave, or turn this into a demonstration. Korak bristled. You are bluffing. Your people are barely beyond your homeworld. Reynolds smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. You really should have done a follow-up survey, she said. And with that, every single orbital platform and satellite around Earth came online. The Dominion fleet's sensors went into overdrive, bombarded by thousands of unexpected signals. Energy readings spiked. Deep space stations that had appeared dormant suddenly radiated power on frequencies the Dominion couldn't even identify. The fleet's weapons systems malfunctioned. Targeting arrays glitched. Star charts updated themselves without permission. A Dominion officer shouted in alarm. Grand Strategist, we are detecting thousands of cyber intrusions across our fleet. They're inside our systems. It wasn't an attack. It was control. Earth hadn't just been preparing for war. They had already won it before the first shot was fired. Korak stared at the hologram of Admiral Reynolds, the weight of his mistake crashing down upon him. He had underestimated this world, this species, and now he was trapped. Reynolds' expression turned neutral. You have two choices, Grand Strategist. You can leave and explain to your superiors how you failed to conquer a primitive world, or, she folded her arms, you can stay and find out just how much we've really been holding back. Korak's throat tightened. For the first time in his career, he did not know what to do. And for the first time in history, the Dominion had encountered a world it could not conquer. The trap they never saw coming. Grand Strategist Korak's fleet hung in space, thousands of kilometers above Earth, caught in a silent, invisible vice. What should have been a routine conquest had turned into an unmitigated disaster before a single shot had been fired. His warships, the pride of the Dominion, were frozen. Their systems compromised, their defenses disabled, their weapons useless. This shouldn't have been possible. And yet it was happening. The hologram of Admiral Victoria Reynolds remained before him, her face unreadable. Well, she asked, arms crossed over her chest. I'm waiting for your answer, Grand Strategist. What's it going to be? Korak bared his fangs in frustration. What have you done to my fleet? His voice was a dangerous growl. Reynolds smiled. Calm, unshaken, amused. Nothing, really. We just turned on the systems we've had in place for the last 50 years. You see, the moment your ships entered our solar system, they tripped a few automated defense measures. Not weapons, mind you. Just subtle inconveniences. Korak's eyes flicked to his command console. His officers frantically tapped at their controls, but the responses were sluggish. Every system on every ship was crawling. Warships that could obliterate moons were suddenly struggling to maintain basic functionality. Our systems, they're running slow, one of his engineers reported, sweat beading on his scaled brow. It's like they're processing something enormous. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Ah, that would be the software update. Korak turned back to her, mandibles twitching in irritation. What? You heard me, Reynolds said, shrugging. The moment you entered our system, We introduced a little patch into your fleet's operating systems. We like to call it the Great Equalizer. It doesn't damage anything. It doesn't disable your weapons outright. It just makes everything take a little longer than it should. One of Korak's tactical officers snarled. Our targeting systems are lagging by over 30 seconds. That's the spirit, Reynolds said, smirking. Your navigation AI is processing unnecessary data. Your reactors are running at 1/5 their normal efficiency. Every time your gunners try to lock onto something, their screens freeze for just a moment longer than it takes to fire. Korak's claws dug into the metal railing of his command platform. This was not a military response. This was psychological warfare. Earth wasn't overpowering them. They were inconveniencing them to death. And that was somehow worse. Korak took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. I do not believe for a moment that your world has the technological capability to rewrite Dominion software. That would require an understanding of our code that you do not. Ah, Reynolds interrupted, holding up a single finger. See, that's where you're wrong. The moment your first probe entered our system 300 years ago, we knew you'd come back eventually. We didn't just sit on our hands waiting for you to show up. We studied. We reverse engineered. And most importantly, her grin widened. We learned how you think. 300 years ago, a forgotten space probe, launched by the Dominion, drifted into the Sol system on an automated survey mission. It was built to be undetectable, equipped with the latest in stealth technology. It lasted 4 minutes before Earth's deep space observatories noticed it. It lasted 7 minutes before an unassuming network of ground-based radio telescopes hacked it. It lasted 10 minutes before it was fully compromised and rerouted into Earth's own satellite network, without the Dominion ever knowing. By the time the probe was allowed to leave the system and return to its creators, it had already been modified. Not physically, but deep within its data logs, hidden beneath layers of false information, a seed had been planted. A tiny, silent worm. Something that would take decades to spread across Dominion infrastructure. Something that would wait. And wait. And wait. Until the right moment. And now, that moment had come. Korak felt cold. You infected our systems centuries ago. Reynolds nodded. We don't like surprises, so we made sure we were the ones in control of them. We let you think we were weak. We let you think we were predictable. But the truth is, Grand Strategist. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You lost this war before you even started it. A hush fell over the bridge. Korak's officers looked to him, eyes filled with uncertainty. He knew what they were thinking. He could feel the cracks forming in their morale. They were a fleet bred for conquest. They were not prepared for humiliation. Korak took a slow breath, forcing his rage into submission. He had to think. He had to adapt. If Earth had truly compromised Dominion systems, then this wasn't just a single lost battle. This was a disaster of unprecedented scale. The High Council would never accept his report. They would demand blood. His. There was only one option left. He turned to his second-in-command, voice calm. Send a message to all ships. Prepare for tactical retreat. There was a pause. Sir, the officer hesitated. We do not retreat. We do now, Korak snapped. We leave before these humans decide to stop toying with us and end us. There was a flicker of hesitation, but only for a moment. The officers on the bridge knew, just as Korak did, that they had already been defeated. Orders were relayed. Engines sputtered to life. The great war fleet of the Dominion, undefeated in 1,000 campaigns, turned tail and ran. But before they could disappear into hyperspace, Reynolds spoke again. Oh, and Grand Strategist. Korak turned to the still hovering hologram, his stomach twisting. You might want to check in with your High Council, she said casually. I believe they've already received the full extent of our system modifications. Korak's blood ran cold. Reynolds gave him one last smirk before the transmission cut out. And just like that, Korak realized this had never been about Earth's defenses. This had been a demonstration, a message not just to him, but to the entire Dominion. A simple, unshakable truth. You don't conquer humanity. Humanity conquers you. The empire that never saw it coming. Grand strategist Korek sat in the command throne of his flagship, the Imperator's Wrath, staring at the hyperspace jump calculations on his console. His officers worked furiously around him, clawed fingers racing across their control panels. Their singular goal: escape. Retreating from a battle was unthinkable in Dominion doctrine, let alone fleeing from a planet classified as a pre-FTL death world. But this wasn't a battle. There had been no exchanged fire, no desperate last stands, no grand displays of Dominion supremacy. Instead, it had been a lesson. A humiliation so deep that Korek knew it would haunt the halls of the High Council for generations. But he wasn't thinking about the shame of failure. He was thinking about what came next. Because if what Admiral Reynolds had said was true, if Earth had already infiltrated the Dominion's core systems, then their empire was already crumbling. They just didn't know it yet, and that terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. A quiet panic in the High Council. By the time Korek's fleet had re-entered Dominion space, the situation had spiraled beyond his control. He hadn't even needed to send a report. The High Council already knew. The sprawling capital world of Sar Telvan was a planet of towering obsidian spires, each one housing the ruling elite of the Dominion. It had never known war. It had never seen a real threat. The Dominion had ruled unchallenged for thousands of years. But today, something had changed. When Korek's warships approached the homeworld, he expected a standard docking procedure, followed by a humiliating trial and inevitable punishment for his failure. Instead, he was met with chaos. Dominion battlecruisers hovered in defensive formations over the capital. Orbital defenses had been activated. The High Council's encrypted channels were in complete disarray. He hadn't brought the war back home. It had already arrived. The moment his fleet dropped out of hyperspace, a new transmission came through. It wasn't from the Dominion military. It wasn't from any of his fellow strategists. It was from Earth. The message that shook an empire. The hologram of Admiral Victoria Reynolds flickered to life in the center of the Dominion's High Council chamber. She stood casually, hands clasped behind her back, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Good evening, esteemed members of the Dominion High Council," she began, her voice smooth, deliberate. "I assume you've been having some technical difficulties over the last few hours." Silence. The room was filled with the most powerful beings in the Dominion. Grand War Master Xal, Supreme Strategist Threx, Chancellor Kilvar, the architects of war, the rulers of entire species. None of them spoke, because she was right. Something had been happening. Entire fleets had been locked out of their navigation systems. Supply chains had vanished from their records. War factories, shipyards, and planetary defense networks had started running bizarre self-diagnostics, ones that none of their engineers had initiated. Their entire military infrastructure had been compromised. And now, this human was standing before them, addressing them as if they were children. Reynolds smiled. "I thought so. That's what happens when you let your systems get a little outdated. We've been inside your networks for a very, very long time, and now we've decided to let you know." Korek stood in the back of the chamber, watching as the High Council struggled to process what was happening. These were beings who had never faced defeat, let alone an enemy they couldn't even fight. This wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. And Earth was holding the ledger. The Empire's fall, not with a bang, but with a password change. "What do you want?" Chancellor Kilvar finally rasped, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "You've made your point. The Dominion recognizes your technological proficiency, but no empire falls from a single act of sabotage. We will recover. We will." "Will you?" Reynolds interrupted, raising an eyebrow. She held up a small, unremarkable datapad. "This device contains every passcode, every encryption key, And every classified document in your entire Dominion network, she said casually. Right now, I could disable your entire war fleet with the push of a button. Korak believed her, because she had already done it to him. This is impossible, one of the High Counselors hissed. You're bluffing. Reynolds tapped a few buttons on the device. Across the chamber, a massive view screen flared to life. Footage appeared. The Dominion's flagship armada, completely locked out of their own controls. A parade of warships, floating aimlessly in space like derelict vessels. Entire planetary defense systems, playing human classical music instead of arming their weapons. The final image was the worst of all. It was the Dominion's most top-secret command center, the Fortress of Eternal Supremacy, and it had been renamed. The text on its command screen now read, "Welcome to the Fortress of Mild Inconvenience." Reynolds chuckled. Took us a while to settle on that name. We almost went with Fortress of Slightly Annoying Glitches, but that didn't fit the character limit. Korak heard a strangled noise from one of the High Counselors. Reynolds' expression turned serious again. Now, let's be clear. This is not an invasion. Earth has no interest in ruling over the Dominion. Frankly, you all seem exhausting. There was a beat of silence before she continued. But let's also be clear about something else. This is over. She took a step forward, her presence demanding attention. You don't control this galaxy anymore. The species you've subjugated, they've been watching. They know what's happening here. And you know what they're doing right now. She tilted her head slightly. They're laughing. The Dominion had ruled by fear. But now, fear had turned to mockery. And once an empire is laughed at, it never recovers. Reynolds sighed dramatically. So, here's my offer. You can try to rebuild, knowing that any time we feel like it, we can shut you down again. Or, she smirked, you can join us, work with us, step into the modern era. Because I promise you this, the Dominion is finished, but something better can take its place. Silence. No one spoke. Korak looked around the chamber, searching the faces of his fellow Dominions. He saw fear, confusion, but most of all, relief. A High Council had ruled for thousands of years, but deep down, they had always known their empire was built on borrowed time. And now, Earth had simply cashed in. Finally, the Supreme Strategist exhaled, shoulders sagging. What, he swallowed, the weight of history pressing down on him. What do we have to do? Reynolds grinned. Let's start with coffee. The day the Dominion stood still. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Dominion High Council, the most powerful governing body in the known universe, was speechless. Admiral Victoria Reynolds stood at the center of their grand chamber, watching a room full of creatures that had conquered entire civilizations now struggle to process reality. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled through fear. For centuries, their war fleets had been the unstoppable force of the galaxy. And now, they had been outmaneuvered, not by superior firepower, not by an advanced alien species, but by humans, a race that by all logic should have been easy prey. But as the saying went, logic had never accounted for Earth. Korak's final stand. Grand Strategist Korak had been silent since the moment Reynolds finished speaking. His mind raced, clawing for a solution, a strategy, anything that could undo this disaster. But there was nothing. Every war fleet, every planetary defense grid, every classified military asset had been rendered useless. They weren't defeated. They had been shut off. And Korak hated it. With a deep breath, he turned to face Reynolds directly. You expect us to believe, he growled, his mandibles twitching, that you would sabotage our empire, humiliate us before the entire galaxy, and then offer us a seat at your table. Reynolds nodded. That's the short version, yeah. You mock us, Korak spat. You cripple our fleets, you invade our networks, and now you act as if we are equals. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. did I say equals? Because that would be generous. Korak stiffened. Reynolds sighed and folded her arms. Look, I get it. This is a tough pill to swallow. Your empire is built on the idea that nobody can stand against you. But today, you learned the truth. You're not invincible. She let the words hang in the air. Then she took a step forward. And here's the part you're really struggling with. Korak, you never were. The words hit like a shockwave. Every High Counselor flinched. Korak's claws dug into his palms. She was right. For all their fleets, their weapons, their strategies, the Dominion had never faced a civilization that could fight back on their own terms. Every war had been a foregone conclusion. They weren't warriors. They were bullies, and Earth had just given them their first real fight. Korak let out a slow breath. And if we refuse your offer? Reynolds shrugged. Then you keep losing. Over and over again. Until your empire collapses completely. You would not allow us to recover. Oh, no. You could try. But every time you rebuild, every time you regroup, every time you even think about trying to reclaim your power. She pulled out her datapad and held it up. I press one button. She tapped the screen. Instantly, the massive holographic displays around the chamber flickered. Live security feeds from Dominion military bases appeared, all offline. Shipyards disabled. Supply chains rerouted. Factories producing toys instead of weapons. The final image. The Dominion's most classified war council chambers, playing an earth-cooking show. That's right, Reynolds said, biting back a grin. Your top strategists just spent the last hour learning how to bake chocolate chip cookies. You're welcome, by the way. They looked stressed. Somewhere in the chamber, a counselor groaned in despair. Korak closed his eyes. It was over. They had already lost. But Reynolds wasn't finished. Of course, she added, you could always surrender to one of the other species you've enslaved over the centuries. I'm sure they'd love the opportunity to return the favor. A few of the High Counselors visibly paled at the suggestion. The Dominion had made many enemies. None of them would be as merciful as the humans. Reynolds took one final step forward. So, what's it gonna be? Korak gritted his teeth. Then, slowly, with the weight of history pressing down on him, he did something no grand strategist had ever done before. He bowed. The Dominion's last war was against itself. The moment Korak lowered his head, the rest of the High Council followed. One by one, the rulers of the most feared empire in the galaxy admitted defeat. The declaration of surrender was signed within the hour. By day's end, the Dominion war era was officially over. But what followed was even worse for the once mighty conquerors, because news spread fast, and the galaxy laughed. It started as whispers, rumors, that the Dominion, the great and terrible Dominion, had been defeated by humans, without a single shot fired. Within a week, entire Dominion colonies revolted. Within a month, major military officials defected to the newly formed Galactic Alliance. By the end of the year, the Dominion no longer existed, not because of an invasion, not because of war, but because their own people stopped believing in them. Because in the end, humans had proven a simple truth. An empire that ruled through fear was no match for a species that thrived on hope. Epilogue. The Coffee Summit. A year later, the former High Counselors of the Galactic Dominion sat at a round table aboard the United Earth Space Station. They weren't rulers anymore. They were diplomats. Korak sat beside Admiral Reynolds, glaring down at the cup of coffee in front of him. So, he muttered, "This is your great cultural exchange." Reynolds smirked. "It's a start." Korak sighed, lifting the cup to his lips. He took a sip. His mandibles clicked in surprise. "This is not terrible," he admitted. Reynolds grinned. "Told you." Silence fell between them. Finally, Korak glanced at her. "Tell me, Reynolds, did you ever even consider actually fighting us?" She thought about it for a moment. Then she smiled. Nah, she said, we like making friends more than enemies. And that was how the most feared empire in the galaxy fell. Not with a war, not with a rebellion, but with a coffee meeting and a really, really good software update.